What would you do if the only thing standing between your child and death was a ring, a simple silver band? Yet men would kill for it. Why did James Collins beg his wife to never part with it, closer than breath? What secret burns inside the metal, enough to turn a whole town against one mother and her son? Stay with us until the end. You'll see Dust Creek like never before. And tell me, would you keep the ring or let it go? Welcome to WestDream Tales, where the Wild West isn't just history, it's a legend. Every week, we bring you untold stories of love, betrayal, and survival on the frontier. Subscribe now, ring the bell, and ride with us into the heart of the Wild West. A storm over Dust Creek. The wind howled across the barren desert, carrying dust like knives against the skin. Inside a tattered cabin on the edge of Dust Creek, Mary Collins pressed her son Eli close against her chest. Her heartbeat thundered louder than the storm outside. The door crashed open with a violent kick, splintering wood across the dirt floor. Jed Harper and his men stormed in, eyes glinting like wolves that had finally cornered their prey. The smell of sweat and gunpowder filled the suffocating air. Jed's revolver gleamed in the flickering lantern light. He leveled it straight at the boy, a cruel smirk tugging his lips. Hand over the ring, Mary, or the boy won't live to see sunrise. Eli trembled, clutching his mother's dress with both fists. Mary's arm curled around him like a shield, though her fingers shook against his small frame. Her other hand slipped instinctively to the chain around her neck, where the worn silver band rested. It was the last piece of James Collins, her husband who never came back from the war. Every night since, she had whispered his name while holding the ring, as if the metal still carried his warmth. Now, it was no longer a memory. It was bait for a predator. Mary's breath came sharp, nearly breaking into sobs, but her eyes, a deep hazel, fixed on Jed's sneer with a glimmer of defiance. The storm outside rattled the walls as if the desert itself demanded her choice. Jed stepped closer, boots grinding over the broken boards. His men blocked every exit, their shadows dancing against the lantern glow. Eli buried his face into his mother's shawl, whimpering, "Mama, don't!" Mary bent down slightly, pressing her lips against Eli's hair. The boy's scent of dust and innocence pierced her chest like a blade. "I won't let them take you," she whispered, though her voice trembled with fear. Jed barked out a laugh, raising his gun higher. "You think that ring is just silver word says it carries more than memory? Don't make me prove it the hard way." The implication stung. Jed knew something Mary had never spoken aloud. Her mind flashed back to James's final letter, the one that warned her never to part with the ring. Not because of its value, but because of what was hidden inside, a secret only she and James had ever known. Her throat tightened. She hadn't even told Eli. Now Jed's words cracked that secret open like thunder splitting the sky. The storm outside roared as if echoing the truth she wished she could bury. Eli lifted his face, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. He didn't understand why the ring mattered, but he understood the danger. His tiny hand wrapped around his mother's, warm against her trembling fingers. Mary held the ring between her thumb and forefinger, its metal cold against her skin. Jed's eyes burned with hunger, each step closer, a hammer beating against her resolve. The room shrank, the storm howled, and the weight of her choice pressed like a vice on her chest. In that moment, she realized the storm outside was nothing compared to the one inside this room. Her husband's memory, her son's life, and a secret locked in silver colliding in one fragile instant. The walls groaned, the lantern flickered, and time itself seemed to hold its breath. Mary drew Eli tighter, her cheek pressed to his temple. The boy's tears dampened her skin, yet his heartbeat gave her strength. She inhaled, steadying herself for the impossible. Jed's voice sliced the silence. "One last chance. Mary, give me the ring or dig your boy's grave tonight." The revolver's hammer clicked back, sharp as the breaking of bones. Mary lifted her head. Her lips brushed Eli's forehead in one final, tender kiss. And then her eyes locked on Jed with a fire he did not expect. The year was 1868, 6 years before the night the storm broke over Dust Creek. Back then, the town was smaller, little more than a scatter of cabins and a main street half paved with dreams. Mary Collins still wore her hair in neat braids, and her laughter still echoed in the evenings. James Collins, tall and broad-shouldered, returned from the fields with dust on his boots and warmth in his eyes. His hands, calloused from work, always softened when they rested on Mary's waist. Eli was not yet born, only a hope that lived in their whispered plans. Mary often traced the simple silver band James had given her on their wedding day. It wasn't worth much to others, but James had slipped it on her finger with trembling hands and a vow too sincere to doubt. "Whatever comes," he had whispered, "this ring will carry us through." The war soon swallowed him. Fort Mason called for men, and James felt duty tighten around his chest like iron. Mary clutched his arm the morning he left, her cheek pressed to his shoulder, unwilling to let go. "Promise me you'll come back," she begged, voice breaking against the dawn. James kissed her hair, lingering there with a silence too heavy for words. Then he slipped the ring from her finger, fastened it on a chain, and placed it around her neck. "Keep it close," he said, closer than breath. Mary frowned, confused, but his eyes urged her not to ask. There was something in his gaze, something beyond fear, that made her shiver. Weeks bled into months. Letters came, scratched and hurried, carrying pieces of James across the miles. One letter, sealed with a crude mark, carried a warning unlike the rest. Never part with the ring. It read, "Not for gold, not for hunger. There are things in this world men would kill to claim, things I cannot explain in ink." Mary reread those lines until the paper frayed at the edges. When word came of his death, she didn't believe it at first. Her hands shook so hard the letter slipped, fluttering into the dirt like a bird struck from the sky. She pressed the ring to her lips, certain she could still feel his warmth in the metal. Grief carved her hollow, but life refused to wait. Dust Creek whispered pity, then suspicion, then cruelty. A widow with nothing but a child and a ring was easy to dismiss, easier still to exploit. Mary gave birth alone in that same cabin. Her cries were swallowed by the desert night, but Eli's first cry broke through with a sharpness that filled her chest. She held him against her skin, damp with sweat and tears, whispering that he was the reason she would endure. Every coin she earned came from washing linens, scrubbing floors, or carrying water for neighbors who paid in scraps. Mr. Carter at the general store offered her credit, but always with a look that weighed more than the goods themselves. Mary learned to nod, to smile faintly, to leave quickly before the shame crushed her. Nights were the hardest. When Eli's fever spiked, she nearly walked to Carter's to beg for medicine. Her fingers clutched the chain at her neck, debating whether to offer the ring, but each time James's words echoed back closer than breath. So she held on, rocking Eli through the fever, whispering prayers to both God and her absent husband. When dawn came and Eli's fever broke, she wept into his hair until her tears tasted of dust. The years stacked like weathered planks. Eli grew into a boy with wide eyes and restless feet. He chased lizards under the sun and clung to Mary's skirts when strangers passed too close. He often asked about the ring. "Why do you wear it?" "Mama," he said, tilting his head, curiosity shining. Mary smiled faintly, brushing his hair back. "It's your father's promise. Someday you'll understand." But part of her feared he already saw more than he should. Sometime, when Eli's fingers brushed the ring, the chain pulsed warm against her skin. She would pull it away, heart racing, though she never spoke of it aloud. Rumors drifted through Dust Creek like tumbleweed. They said James had stumbled on something at Fort Mason before his death. Some claimed it was gold. Others whispered of maps and hidden vaults. Mary pretended not to listen, but she noticed how eyes lingered too long on the chain at her neck. Even in church, she felt the weight of stares, sharp as needles. It wasn't grief they saw, it was hunger. One evening, as the sun bled orange over the horizon, a stranger stopped by her cabin, tall, with a scar across his chin. He tipped his hat politely. "Ma'am," he said, "heard tell you've got something worth keeping safe." Mary stiffened, her hand instinctively rising to the chain. The stranger's smile didn't reach his eyes. He tipped his hat again and left, but dust lingered long after his boots had gone. That night, Mary pulled the chain from her neck and studied the ring by lantern light. She turned it over and over, searching for what James had feared. The silver was plain, but inside the band, faint marks etched like veins caught her breath. She traced them with her fingertip, the lines almost forming a pattern. When her skin warmed the metal, the pattern glowed faintly, like fireflies caught in silver. Startled, she dropped it onto the table, breath hitching in her throat. Eli stirred in his sleep, murmuring, and she rushed to tuck the ring back beneath her blouse. The glow faded, swallowed by cloth and silence. Mary pressed her palm flat against her chest, her heart hammering. From that night, the ring was never just a memory again. It was a secret she bore alone, one she couldn't confess to a soul, not even to Eli, whose questions grew sharper with age. Each time she looked into his eyes, so like James's, she wondered if he would one day bear the burden. And each time she kissed his hair, she vowed to keep it from him as long as she could. The desert was harsh enough without adding shadows of secrets, but Dust Creek had long ears and sharper teeth. Whispers reached men like Jed Harper, men who thrived on other people's fears. Mary noticed his gang lurking near the creek more often, eyes flicking toward her cabin. She pulled Eli close each time, her hand brushing his cheek in small, protective gestures. Physical closeness became her shield, an arm draped across his shoulders. A kiss pressed to his temple. To Eli, it was comfort. To Mary, it was survival. One market day, Eli slipped. He told another boy that his father's ring was magic, that it would one day keep them safe. The boy laughed, but Jed's man overheard. From that moment, Mary felt the ground shift under her feet. Shadows lengthened around their home, and footsteps echoed where silence once lived. She knew it was only a matter of time before the storm came. And when it did, the storm would not only test her courage as a mother, it would test the vow buried inside silver, the one James had left behind. A vow whose true meaning was still hidden even from her. The days after the market carried a weight Mary could not shake. Each morning, she woke to the sound of Eli's laughter, but her heart never fully rested. She could feel the change, as if the desert itself held its breath. Neighbors grew cautious. Some greeted her with polite nods, but their eyes lingered too long on her chest where the chain disappeared. Others whispered in corners, voices low yet sharp enough to cut. Mary walked faster through the town, clutching Eli's hand tightly. The boy's steps bounced with innocence, but hers dragged under the burden of eyes she could not escape. Even the church pews no longer felt safe, the silence too loud around her. One afternoon, while washing clothes by the creek, she noticed boot prints in the sand. They were fresh, pressed deep, circling the stones where she knelt. Her breath caught as she realized she had not come alone. A branch snapped in the distance. She pulled Eli close, pressing his small body against her side. The water rippled, carrying away the sound of her quickening heart. That night, she barred the cabin door with a wooden beam. Eli asked why, his eyes wide in the dim lantern glow. Mary kissed his forehead softly. Because some nights, even stars can't keep watch. Sleep did not come easy. The wind howled across the desert plain, rattling the shutters like fists demanding entry. Mary lay awake, her arm draped across Eli, feeling every rise and fall of his chest. The next morning, she found a dead crow nailed to her doorframe, its wings spread wide, feathers blackened with dust, beak frozen open in a silent scream. Eli gasped, but Mary pulled him back before he could touch it. Her stomach knotted. It wasn't just a warning, it was a signature. Jed Harper was letting her know he was near. From then on, shadows followed them everywhere. When she drew water at the well, men lingered at the edge, their boots scuffing the dirt. When she crossed the street, horses shifted nervously as riders stared too long. Eli began to sense it. At night, he clutched her tighter, whispering, "Mama, they're watching." Mary hushed him, pressing her cheek to his hair, though fear throbbed in her own chest. She tried to hide the ring better. Sometimes she slipped it into a pouch under her dress, other times beneath loose floorboards. But no matter where she placed it, the weight still pressed against her heart. One evening, while Eli played with carved wooden animals on the floor, Mary sat by the lantern. Her fingers traced the hidden marks inside the band, the faint patterns glowing briefly under her touch. The light flickered, casting strange shapes on the walls. Eli noticed. His eyes widened, curiosity sparking. "Mama, it shines when you hold it." Mary's throat tightened, and she quickly closed her fist around the ring. "Just a trick of the light," she said, but her voice cracked. Eli leaned into her lap, resting his cheek against her knee. She stroked his hair, her touch lingering as if to anchor them both. That night, Mary dreamt of James. He stood in the doorway of the cabin, his face half shadow, half light. In his hand, he held the same ring, glowing as if alive. "You must not let them take it," his voice rumbled, deep as thunder. Mary reached for him, but her hands passed through air. The dream shattered with Eli's cry, dragging her back to the waking dark. The following week, Eli's slip of tongue returned to haunt them. At the general store, one of Jed's men leaned against the counter, grinning. "Pretty thing your boy talked about," he drawled. "Said it could keep bullets from flying straight." Mary's blood ran cold. She paid quickly, pulling Eli out by the hand, her grip so tight the boy winced. The man's laughter followed them down the street, heavy as chains. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk had already settled. Mary shut the door, bolted it, and dropped to her knees, clutching Eli close. He squirmed at first, confused, but then melted against her, his small arms wrapping around her neck. "Mama, I'm sorry," he whispered. Tears stung her eyes as she pressed her lips to his temple. "You don't need to be sorry, love. You only spoke the truth. The danger is mine to carry." But in her heart, she knew the danger was theirs. Every misstep now belonged to both of them, and Dust Creek was waiting for them to stumble. The next market day, the air itself seemed to watch her. Jed Harper leaned against the saloon post, his hat tipped low, eyes like knives in the shadow. His grin cut through the crowd, thin and merciless. Mary's knees nearly buckled, but she forced herself upright. She held Eli's hand tighter, kissed the top of his head, and kept walking. Jed's men followed, slow and deliberate, their boots like drums of war. That evening, a stone shattered her window. Wrapped around it was a scrap of paper. "Tomorrow." Mary's hands shook as she pulled Eli away from the glass. The boy's lips quivered. "What does it mean?" he asked, eyes wide. Mary kissed his cheek softly, though her voice was still. "It means we don't leave the house tonight." The hours crawled by, every sound outside like the snap of a gun. Mary kept Eli on her lap, her arms wrapped tight, their foreheads nearly touching. His warmth was her anchor, and her touch was his shield. At midnight, hoofbeats thundered past the cabin. The walls shook, dust falling from the beams above. Eli whimpered, burying his face into her neck. Mary held him tighter, whispering against his hair. "We will endure. We must." But deep down, she felt the storm pressing closer with every beat of her heart. And in the corner of the room, where the lantern cast its faintest light, the ring glimmered on its own. Not bright, not bold, just enough to promise that what was coming would not be simple theft. It would be a reckoning. The night after the stone shattered her window, Dust Creek held its breath. Mary knew the message meant only one thing: Jed Harper was coming. She spent the day preparing, though there was little she could truly do. Eli helped without question, moving small bundles of kindling, carrying buckets of water from the well. He didn't ask why, but his eyes carried the weight of a child who already understood too much. Mary kissed his forehead softly, her hand lingering on his cheek longer than usual. When dusk fell, the desert sky bled crimson before sinking into black. The cabin stood fragile against the vastness, its lantern light a faint beacon swallowed by shadows. Mary bolted the door and pulled Eli close to her side. Hoofbeats came first, low and steady, drumming closer with each breath. Then voices rough, mocking, hungry. Jed Harper's laughter rose above the rest, cold and merciless. The cabin door shook under the first strike. Wood groaned. Nails strained. Dust rained down from the beams. Eli flinched, burying his face against Mary's shawl. Mary whispered against his hair, "Stay quiet, love. Stay still." Her hand brushed the chain at her neck, feeling the ring burn cold against her skin. The memory of James's last words echoed like a heartbeat closer than breath. The door splintered under the second strike. Jed's men poured in, their boots thudding heavy, eyes wild in the lantern glow. Mary stood in front of Eli, her body a frail barrier against the storm. Jed stepped forward, hat tipped low, revolver gleaming. His grin widened when he saw the chain around her neck. "You've kept it close, just like he told you." He sneered. Mary's breath hitched, but her gaze didn't falter. "What do you want from us?" she asked, though the answer already weighed in her chest. Jed twirled the gun casually, like a man playing with time. "Only what belongs to me now," he said. His eyes flicked toward Eli, sharp as blades. Mary's arms tightened around the boy, pulling him closer. Jed raised the revolver. "Give me the ring, Mary, or your son won't see the dawn." The words fell like stones, heavy and final. Mary's fingers trembled as they closed around the ring. The metal pulsed faintly, as though alive, answering some unspoken call. Jed's eyes narrowed, catching the faint glow. He stepped closer, hunger burning in his face. Mary's chest heaved, torn between memory and survival. She kissed Eli's temple gently, her lips lingering as if to draw courage from him. Then she pulled the chain over her head. The ring dangled in the lamplight, glimmering with more than silver. Gasps rippled among Jed's men as the faint etchings shimmered like fire. Jed lunged forward, hand outstretched, but Mary threw the ring past him, hurling it through the broken window into the storm. For a heartbeat, everyone froze, their eyes chasing the flash of silver into darkness. Jed cursed, spinning to follow. Mary seized the moment, shoving Eli toward the open door. "Run!" she cried, her voice raw with desperation. They bolted into the desert night, the wind cutting sharp, sand stinging their faces. Behind them, Jed's fury roared, gunshots cracking like thunder. Bullets split the air, one grazing Mary's shoulder with searing fire. She stumbled but didn't fall. Eli's small hand clung to hers, pulling with surprising strength. The boy's grip was the only anchor keeping her upright. They dashed toward the dry creek bed, moonlight casting jagged shadows. Mary's breath tore in her throat, each step heavier than the last. But Eli's voice urged her on. "Mama!" This way, a shot sparked against stone, inches from Eli's foot. Mary yanked him close, shielding him with her body as they tumbled behind a boulder. Her arm wrapped tight around him, her cheek pressed to his hair. Jed's boots crunched closer, his men spreading out like wolves in the night. The desert wind carried their curses, their threats. Mary held Eli close, whispering, "Stay still, love. Don't move." The ring glimmered faintly in the sand nearby, half buried under dust. Eli saw it first, his eyes widening. "Mama, it's there," he whispered urgently. Mary followed his gaze, her heart lurching. The faint light pulsed again, steady as a heartbeat. It was as if the ring was calling to them. She crawled forward, keeping low, the grit biting into her knees. Jed's shadow loomed closer, his revolver sweeping the rocks. Mary stretched her hand, fingers brushing the metal. The instant she touched it, warmth surged through her palm. The etchings flared bright, casting a glow across the sand. Jed cursed, spinning toward the light. Mary clutched the ring tight, pulling Eli against her. The glow wrapped around them like a fragile shield, just enough to blur their outlines in the dark. Jed's bullet cracked, sparking harmlessly against stone. His men shouted, confused, firing wildly into the night. Mary's chest heaved as she dragged Eli deeper into the shadows, the ring's light fading to a dim pulse. The storm howled above them, covering their escape. Jed's rage tore through the desert. "You can't run forever. Mary, the boy will lead me to it." His voice carried like a curse, echoing against the canyon walls. Mary pressed Eli's face into her shoulder, kissing his hair. Her tears mixed with dust, but her voice was steady. "They'll never take you, not while I breathe." The night stretched on, filled with pursuit and fear. Yet in the darkest hour, Mary felt something shift. The ring was no longer just memory, no longer just burden. It was choice. And with Eli in her arms, she chose to fight. The desert, the storm, and even Jed Harper would have to reckon with that choice before dawn. Dawn crept over the desert like a pale flame, touching the rocks and brush with weary light. Mary and Eli staggered through the dry creek bed, their clothes torn, their faces streaked with dust and sweat. Behind them, the night's terror still echoed, though the hoofbeats had finally faded. Mary's shoulder throbbed where the bullet grazed her flesh. Each step felt heavier, yet she would not let Eli see her falter. The boy clung to her hand, his small fingers strong, guiding her forward. They reached the edge of town just as the church bell rang, calling the faithful. Villagers turned, eyes wide at the sight of the battered woman and child. Whispers rose like wind through dry grass, Jed Harper's name threaded through them. Sheriff Thomas Reed pushed through the crowd, his face stern but troubled. He had heard rumors for months, but now the truth stood before him in bruises and blood. "Mary," he said gently. "What happened?" Mary's lips parted, but words caught in her throat. Instead, she lifted the chain and showed him the ring, its faint glow fading in the daylight. Reed's eyes widened, and for a moment, even the hardened sheriff seemed shaken. That same day, Jed Harper swaggered back into town. Dust and blood streaked his clothes. Fury burned in his face, but his arrogance remained. He marched into the saloon, shouting that Mary carried what was his. For the first time, Dust Creek did not bow. Men and women rose from their seats, their eyes hard with years of fear turned into resolve. Sheriff Reed stepped forward, his hand on the grip of his revolver, though it never left the holster. Jed drew his weapon, but hands grabbed him from all sides. The crowd swarmed, wresting the gun away, binding his arms with rawhide rope. His curses filled the room, but no one listened anymore. The trial came the next morning beneath the desert sun. Mary stood at the edge of the crowd. Eli pressed against her side. Testimonies piled high: extortion, theft, murder. The gallows waited. Jed stood tall, the rope around his neck, eyes still burning. He laughed, a sound sharp and bitter. "You think killing me ends this? That ring doesn't belong to her. It never did." The words rippled through the crowd like a chill wind. Mary's fingers closed protectively over Eli's shoulder, her other hand clutching the chain at her neck. Jed's grin widened, as if he had left behind a secret no one could bury. The hangman pulled the lever, and silence fell heavy over Dust Creek. When the body stilled, the people exhaled as though the desert itself had been cleansed. But Mary knew Jed's final words were not empty. That evening, she sat on the cabin's porch with Eli curled against her side. The boy's head rested on her shoulder, his breath steady in sleep. Mary turned the ring in her hand, the etchings faint but alive. She remembered James's last letter, the warning carved between lines of love. Never part with the ring, not for gold, not for hunger. Now she understood it was not the metal, but the promise it carried. Years slipped by, carried on the desert wind. Eli grew taller, his face sharpening into the echo of his father's. Mary's hair silvered, though her eyes still held the fire that had carried them through. On Eli's 17th birthday, he placed the chain back into her hand. "Mama," he said softly, "I think it belongs to you more than me." Mary's fingers trembled as she closed them around the metal. "No, love," she whispered, kissing his cheek. "It belongs to us, to our blood, to his memory, to your future." The ring pulsed faintly, as though agreeing with her words. One evening, near the same creek where shadows once stalked her, Mary stood with Eli. The setting sun cast long streaks of fire across the sand. She placed the ring in his palm, folding his fingers gently over it. "Your father asked me to keep it closer than breath," she said. "I did, but now it's your turn. Carry it not as burden, but as light." Eli's eyes glistened. His lips pressed to her forehead in a quiet vow. That night, Mary dreamed again of James. He stood beneath a sky of endless stars, smiling faintly. The ring gleamed on his hand, but when she looked again, it was Eli who wore it. She woke with tears on her cheeks. Eli sleeping beside her, the ring warm against his chest. For the first time since James's death, the burden felt lighter, not gone, but shared. Dust Creek moved on, rebuilding, breathing easier. But when the desert wind carried whispers of danger, people remembered the widow who defied Jed Harper. They remembered the silver band that glowed like a heartbeat. Mary often touched Eli's hair as he worked, her lips brushing his temple in fleeting gestures of love. Physical closeness had been her shield once. Now it was her way of passing strength. Every touch was a reminder storms would come, but family endured. The last light of Dust Creek wasn't in the gallows or the sheriff's badge. It was in a mother's choice, a boy's courage, and a promise bound in silver. And as long as the ring endured, so would they. You've just heard one story that shaped Dust Creek forever, but the frontier holds many more. If you felt the dust, the danger, and the heartbeat of the West tonight, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. West Dream Tales, because some legends deserve to be remembered.